I don't know, is it me or does the choir look taller today? My throat's bugging me today. May not be able to preach. Don't worry, Danny. I'll pull it out. Might take me 45 minutes longer, but I'll get it there. And we're kind of moving into a different gospel. We've been kind of playing around a little bit in Matthew. Oh, are you going to do it? In Matthew's gospel. And so now we're going to kind of move into John's gospel. And John's an interesting gospel. The way the New Testament's set up, the first 4 books in the New Testament are going to be your gospels. And that's going to be the story, the life, the death, resurrection of Jesus. Kind of introduces the rest of the story of the New Testament. And you have 3 gospels that are in there, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that come out of the same source. They kind of have a similar source, and so a lot of their stories are going to be similar. They call that synoptic gospels. And then you've got John. John was written a little bit later, written to a completely different community of people, and maybe a decade or 2 even later than some of the others. And because it is so different, it has really grasped the imaginations of all of those who kind of study this kind of stuff for a living. You know, those real interesting type people we have in seminary, let me tell you. And because they grasp the attention to that, there's a lot of things that they talk about John in the back, about what it's about and who he is and what he does and who he's writing to. I think it's kind of safe to assume from all these different things that John is a little more intellectual, a little more philosophical than the other Gospels. In fact, there's some parts about his Gospel that it's rather poetic. And it's kind of a breath of fresh air to kind of see this change of pace in John and the rest of the different types of Gospels. And let's just get an example of that. All you got to do is read the first 15 verses of John's Gospel just to kind of understand. That's one of my favorite readings of all time. It's just profoundly written, like no other Gospel really dares to write. So you might want to look at that as kind of an example of how he even starts off his Gospel and kind of introduces a story. Now, some have also argued that John is probably maybe too intellectual for his own good. That he tends to be maybe outthinking the simplicity of Jesus. Some say that you can probably liken the writer of John as someone who is like an engineer in today's terminology, right? Craig, you know what an engineer does, right? Engineers solve problems. Problems we never knew we had. But they have this phenomenal way of communicating the solutions to the problems in ways none of us understand. That's what an engineer does. And they kind of say, well, that's kind of the way it is with the Gospel of John. He kind of has a different way of talking and sharing this information. And I'm not picking on engineers by any means. My daughter is about to marry an engineer. And to hear him talk about that helicopter stuff that he does all the time, even tries to dumb it down so I can understand, it still makes me a little bit dizzy. But he also understands, too, that he knows who I am. He knows that the hardest 2 years of my life were the 5th grade. And so we're just on a different level, and he realizes that. But what I really love about the Gospel of John is that he's not only poetic in his writings in a lot of ways, but the points that he makes about being a follower of Jesus are very profound. But they're also very subtle. That if you're not paying attention, that you're going to miss a pretty good story. And our reading is that way. We're not even out of the first chapter of John, and there it is. It's pretty profound. It's a familiar story. Something we've heard for some of us for most of our lives. It's the story of John the Baptist who's in the river. Which river? Not the Mississippi, not the Brazos. Which river is he in? Baptizing. Is that a question or an answer? We got a long ways to go, people. He's in the Jordan River. He is baptizing people. And he's with his disciples in this particular scene. One of them is Andrew, who is important to the story, but we're not going to get to that today. We'll get to that next Sunday. But in this particular scene, we have him in the river. He got disciples around. And we also have on the shoreline, we have those old religious people who are standing with their arms folded off, trying to be a little skeptic of what's going on, not really fully trusting that this guy John knows what he's doing. And so he's there, and they're being skeptics, and they're watching all this taking place, and there's large crowds of people that are starting to gather around. They're questioning his motives. In fact, just the fact that these religious leaders are in attendance there tells us a little bit more about the story than what's being read. That tells you this has to be a pretty large event that's taking place. It may be over a course of 2 or 3 days that's happening, that John is getting the attention of people. People are coming to him, and they're coming into the water, and they're being baptized, and it's making such a fuss that the religious leaders thought, hey, we better get somebody to go down there and check it out just to make sure that they know what they're doing or to see what's going on. We need to investigate just a little bit. And so John he understands his role in this world. He knows who he is. He knows he's not the big dog. So when the religious leaders come and investigate a little bit and start to question him, he just kind of backs up and says, hey, I'm just the messenger. My job, my role in this whole scene that you're seeing is to get these people ready for the big dog, for the big man who's about to follow me. And so in my mind, I see this chaotic area, this scene around us. This is probably not a real wide river, so people are coming in. There's trees in different areas, and you have all sorts of different people everywhere. You got people in the water just waiting to be baptized. You got a shoreline full of people that are filled with seekers who are wanting to learn more. You probably have some curious onlookers. You got those religious skeptics that are in there. You also have the church police, those who blow the whistle when something is different than the way it should be. And in this whole mass display of humanity, John somehow just spots the real man. Everything that's going on, he spots him. And he points him out to his disciples. He said, there he is. There's the man. You see him? Where? Right there. He's that 6-foot-tall white European male there with the light brown hair. See him there? Standing in the sea of dark Middle Eastern people? That's got to be Jesus. That's got to be him, because I recognize him from the picture in the parlor in Capernaum. If Jesus looked like that, I bet he would stick out and people would know exactly who he was. Don't you think? How I know that? They know exactly who the gringo is when I go to Ecuador. Everybody is 5 foot tall there and dark. But Jesus didn't look like that. He looked like everybody else, except for one thing. And that one thing is what really puzzles me. How did John know who he was? How did he point him out in a crowd? How did he know? What made Jesus stand out in the crowd? He stayed a couple of times in there, I did not know him. I did not know him. I think that's by design. But once he saw him, he knew who he was. Do you know people like that? Do you know people like that? Someone just grabs your attention because of the way they carry themselves. Their demeanor, their confidence. They appear to be unshakable, unmovable. There's that absence of worry, of fret, of anger, of stress, of pressure that we carry on our faces and in our postures every day, and we spend thousands of dollars every year to put face cream on to get rid of these wrinkles because we don't know why these wrinkles are in our face. Do we know people like that? To me, that's the face of a child of God. One who is completely confident in their relationship with God. They know who they are. They know where they're going. And they know to whom they belong to. My grandfather was one such person. He just had that confidence. He also had wrinkles. But he had that confidence. He had that demeanor. He had that presence that made people just want to be around him. And it's obvious. It's noticeable. And Jesus, I believe, was obvious not only to John, but to those two disciples who were with him, because they said, you know what? We're leaving you and we're going to go check out this guy because there's something about him that we need to know. And so they left John and they went and followed Jesus around. We don't know how long he went, but enough for Jesus to take notice and to stop and then turn around. And I love how direct Jesus is. And he looked at him and they said to him, what are you looking for? I like the NIV a little bit different. I like it because it's a little more direct. What do you want? What do you want? Those are great questions. Those are fantastic questions. I think our faith questions are that simple. What do you want? What are you looking for? What are you seeking? Those are questions that we all need to be asking every time we come into this place. What do you want? What do you need? And we're not talking about what you want in service, which hymn you want to select it, if you want a doxology or not. We're talking about the deeper questions of life. Because those simple faith questions cause us to stop and to think about the deep darkness of our lives, that deep pit of our souls that begins to reveal what is empty, what's lacking in our lives, what we hunger for. What do we need? What do we truly need to make our lives complete? And to answer those questions that he asked, and to bring them before the very Christ, is just the beginning of our journey with God. But, in every crowd there's always a big but, isn't there? But, here's the hard part. We have to trust the one who can lead us to the answers to these questions. We have to learn how to trust and follow him and be willing to follow him to places that we are not very sure where we're going or what's going to happen. And that, to me, friends, is the definition of faith. Is going on a journey anyway. And just seeking to find the answers to those questions, even though they will not be answered in the way that we think they're going to be answered. What are you looking for? What do you want? Why are you here? What are you seeking? Simple questions that lead to deeper answers that demand that we trust and follow the one who we can fulfill our emptiness. The one who can fulfill our lacking, who can fulfill our hunger and give us what we truly need to make our lives complete. The problem is we just don't ask these particular questions at the beginning of our journey of faith. We seek to know these answers and ask these questions every new year, if not more. Because here's the kicker, guys. We're here for a reason. And one of the reasons we're here to do is to grow up. And when we grow, we change. And when we change, our needs change. And when our needs change, our emptinesses change. Our lackings begin to change. Our hungers change. And God is constantly trying to lead us to a better place in our lives until we can walk with confidence. And that we can be the ones who are being picked out of a crowd as one who has the appearance of being a child of God. That's who we are. And what we're constantly trying to achieve. New Year's resolution. Answer the question that Jesus asked. Why are you here? What are you looking for? And look deep within you, not on the surface. I need more hair. I need to lose 45 pounds. Not that kind of stuff. What do you need? And then know what you need. And come prepared to follow the one who can show you where you need to go. Next week, we're going to take a look at where Jesus is leading those disciples that went to follow him. And then also what happened to them when they began to trust him enough to go to places. But I want you to reflect on this question. It's not necessarily a question, it's a statement with a question mark at the end. Know what you want. Because we may think we know, but we really don't know unless we're quiet and dip deep into our souls. Reflect on this question, and as we begin to gather together and come back, we'll sing together and we'll prepare to offer ourselves to God. We'll start our process of sharing communion, but also offering our offerings together. Let us contemplate.